Here's how people that study diseases visualize a zombie outbreak outside Vegas. And here's how Zack Snyder does it in Army of the Dead. Both approaches have merit, but this one uses a mathematical model to predict where and how quickly zombies would take over. Starting from New York, aggressive zombies would wipe out most of the country in about 50 days. And what's cool is that these kinds of tests are often based on the techniques we use to predict actual diseases. So we'll show you how zombie survival tests work, and then count down 5 cities where you might be safe. Vegas probably isn't gonna make it. Fittingly, there are hordes of scientific zombie studies out there. Get it? Hordes. And they're often grim.
We could die.
Yeah, we'll probably die.
But sort of hilarious. Like the 2009 Canadian paper that found that 500,000 humans would be wiped out by zombies within days, even with quarantine measures added, but still managed to throw shade at Ottawa, which I guess is a Canadian thing. Zombie scientist and zoonotic disease specialist Dr. Tara Smith said the popularity of zombies is because they offer a gateway into the study of other diseases.
All of the factors that unfortunately we've seen in the past year, you can use zombies to talk about a lot of those different things that are going on, even if the mode of transmission is not always exactly the same.
At the most basic level, a zombie test has to measure the spread of a disease, undeath in this case. And that usually means a mathematical model that's also used to predict real epidemics like Ebola, SARS. They're even used on historical plagues. One that's frequently employed is called the SIR model, and essentially it takes a static population and divides it into buckets of susceptible, infected, and removed individuals, the last of which can mean either immune or dead, or presumably locked inside a casino vault would count too? Modelers make educated guesses about rates of infection and removal, and then watch the population buckets drain and fill over time.
And then once the R category gets high enough, you basically end the outbreak.
So for zombies, we just switch the I to a Z and watch the carnage, right? Well, yeah, sorta. But you should see the actual models when they're finished, like this one. They're so complicated. Like, it makes me want to eat scientists' brains to get smarter complicated. Plus,
when you have zombies, you have to add in some additional variables.
If you look at Army of the Dead, for instance, you probably need additional population buckets for alphas and alpha primes. But more than that, there are tons of those variables that affect the rates of zombie infection and removal, which is where scholars of the undead get creative. Drawing on real lessons from epidemics, there's evidence that a city's population density and number of international flight routes would increase transmission. But it's not just density, say zombie researchers, it's how far away you are from other population centers. In the simulation I mentioned at the top, low-density places close to big cities get wiped out just as quickly because multiple zombie waves converge there, but remote areas in the Upper Rockies or northern Maine hold out. And there's this other hurdle in building a unified zombie test. Zombieism in Army of the Dead operates differently from that in, say, World War Z with respect to things like incubation period, and that changes the map a lot. If you have something with a short incubation period, then you're going to have one epicenter. People don't have time to get out and get to other big cities, so it might be easier to contain the zombies, whereas if you had something with a longer incubation period, you'd see zombieism popping up around the globe as people move around. Assuming you get through all that, then there are the other set of variables, humanity's response, which can potentially fill up the removed bucket quicker. Scholars have suggested everything from levels of firearm ownership, military and law enforcement populations, previous healthcare crisis response, and even food production capabilities for long undead sieges. But one variable I didn't think about is wildlife.
It's a goddamn zombie tiger. That's crossing the line.
One scholar has argued that the living dead would be picked apart by various scavengers, from ravens to grizzlies. But here's the rebuttal to that.
My response to that is wildlife as secondary reservoirs for a virus, like a zoonotic virus. Certain animals become zombies, and then they can, of course, bite people as well.
So the zombie tiger is approved by a scientist. Putting those together with a little more, the ideal city in a zombie outbreak might be less dense, more remote, more protected by its surroundings, and less connected via air routes, with more guns, more people trained to use guns, more engineers, more food, and proven public health infrastructure. So right away, you can probably count out some of the world's greatest cities, from London to Seoul to Sao Paulo. It's reasonable to think that anything with a population density and international air index in the top 25 would become a capital of the undead. So, the reveal. 5 cities where you just might survive. Once famous for another kind of horde, Mongolian's capital of Ulaanbaatar might now stand a chance against hordes of zombies. Even though it's one of the bigger cities on our list, its population density is ridiculously low, but it's nothing compared to the population density once you leave the city, which is 5. Desolate landscape stretches out for hundreds of miles in every direction, meaning Mongolia is a natural zombie breaker. If you like your remoteness with a little more Western civilization, then perhaps you could wait out the zombie apocalypse in Perth, Australia. Sometimes called the most remote city in the world because the next closest big city is 1,300 miles away, Perth also has low population density, the well-ranked Australian military, and a recent history of efficient public health responses. But if you can stomach a cooler climate, it's hard to do better than the strategic Russian city of Norilsk, which you actually need permission to enter. And it's not just because it's a far-flung city above the Arctic Circle, but it's also because Russia has the most police per capita and produces the most engineering graduates per year in the world. Assuming you could get there, Cuba wouldn't be such a bad place to wait out some shamblers. While Havana is far too dense, the small eastern city of Baracoa has a lot going for it. First, mountains surround it, and there's only one road through them. Second, despite a smaller population and years of sanctions, Cuba is a surprise medical powerhouse with several pandemic countermeasures and an actual lung cancer vaccine in testing, so perhaps they could wipe out zombieism? In the meantime though, just look at Baracoa. This beautiful, defensible place is also the center of chocolate production in Cuba. Need I say more? But we couldn't forget the United States of America, because while this great land may be slow to stir, we do have ample land and food. Vegas probably wouldn't do so great due to its medium population density and high number of travelers, but it's worth noting that remote Vegas sometimes survives that earlier simulation when zombies start on the coasts, although, of course, that didn't take air travel into account. So you're probably better heading up to the northern Rockies to a city like Great Falls, Montana, which has a much more favorable population density. But it also has guns. According to a 2020 study, 66% of Montana adults own firearms, highest in a nation famous for owning them. Great Falls does have one unusual feature though. It's the only place in Montana that's right next to a military base, in this case the one that controls nuclear missiles. I don't know, it seems like that might be important somehow. So there you have it, 5 places that may do better than Vegas when the dead rise. Of course, predicting a zombie attack isn't an exact science, it's sort of a goofy cousin of science, so everyone can do it. Let us know whether your city would make it or not when the zombies come. But until that day, Viva Las Vegas! The US military doesn't seem super prepared for zombies in Army of the Dead, but their real-life zombie plan may or may not comfort you. In 2014, journalists broke news of CONOP 8888, US Strategic Command's allegedly for training purposes only plan in case of a zombie attack. We'll link to it, it's really good. Among other things, it envisions an attack by zombie chickens, and then worrisomely concludes that STRATCOM can't hold out for 30 days. Maybe I'll just stick close to one-man army, Dave Bautista.